My breakfast has just arrived. You can use this as B-roll if you want, but some people hate eating. I'm not for or against it on a podcast, I'll be honest. Depends on the audio quality, you know? Because then you get into like ASMR territory.
What is Chewbacca's favorite cookie?
Oh no. I don't know. What is Chewbacca's favorite cookie?
A chocolate chip Wookiee.
Oh, it's so bad.
I know. It's so bad.
I thought it was gonna be something like to do with the word chewy, like, you know, because it rhymes with cookie. That's worse somehow.
Yeah.
Jesus
it's
Christ.
Worse.
That's brutal, dude. Boy. Why are we talking about Wookiees?
So talking about Wookiees, looking back at episode 3 and looking at the scene where Yoda goes to Kashyyyk, which is Chewbacca's home planet and the home planet of all of the Wookiees, but going back to look at that scene on that planet where the bad guys are invading for whatever reason, because apparently Kashyyyk is actually a really important planet, whether that's from the purpose of like the old idea of hyperspace lanes and how important some planets were to those hyperspace lanes because they could control the way that traffic flowed in space, basically. Although Lucasfilm currently seems to have mostly gotten rid of that idea. But for whatever reason, Kashyyyk was an important planet because Yoda himself was actually the one who went to help in this battle. It wasn't any of the, lesser Jedi Masters. And you could say that that was also favoritism because he is proven to have a relationship with Chewie and Tarfor, Chewie's dad.
Yes.
What about the droid attack on the Wookiees?
It is critical we send an attack group there immediately.
He's right. It's a system we cannot afford to lose.
Go, I will. Good relations with the Wookiees I have.
Maybe this was just a family friendship thing and the planet wasn't all that important and Yoda was just playing favorites.
Yeah.
Yep. So we fly in over the beach and we see these humongous trees that everyone has read about in all of the books and everything. And the first thought that I always have when talking about those trees is that it reminds me of way back to the Andalites and the Hork-Bajir, and that's what their home planet was supposed to be, was these massive trees that were like miles tall, and that's why the Hork-Bajir had these claws and everything on their elbows and everything, because they used all of these different claws for climbing these huge trees. And apparently the Wookiees are very much the same, and that's why they have this immense strength. That's why they're supposed to have claws as well. Then we go in on these trees. We see all of their like tree hut houses that they have built. They basically like build into the trees. But it's just so cool. Fascinating looking. Yeah, just looking at the way that everything is built together and the ecology of the planet, the way that the Wookiees kind of symbolize apes as we would see them in our planet, and how they're living with nature. And if you can imagine apes evolving and living in nature aside from building cities and stuff like modern humans did. But when the Wookiees evolved, they took a different path and combined their technology with nature. But there's just so much that's interesting about this. It's such a short clip too, because it was only less than 5 minutes, I think, of screen time that we got in Kashyyyk.
Where does this take place in the story?
So this is right before Order 66 is called, and it's actually while Yoda is here on this planet that the Emperor decrees Order 66, and all of the stormtroopers start killing Jedi all over the place.
Oh, that's why it's why he beheads them at the end. I've just got to that bit now, and he just completely nukes these two guys, like aces them immediately. Oh my, he does like, oh my god. Yoda!
And that is, again, one of my favorite scenes, just from the fact that that Chewie and Tarfor have no clue why he just killed his own men. They're like, nope, we're getting our little dude out of here. And they take him and run.
Yeah, no questions. They're super on board immediately.
Yeah, they don't care. They're just like, we're taking you and we're gonna hide you. But there's so many ways I could take looking at this scene, but just like kind of starting off from the beginning, just looking at the ecology of everything. And I was thinking, we first see these like 3 or 4 enormous trees literally on the beach, and is it on the beach where it's an ocean that is saltwater, like in our world? Because typically you don't see those enormous trees growing that close to the beach unless there's been like massive erosion and it used to be further inland or something like that. And I'm thinking, like, how did these things grow that big unless they're functioning completely different on a cellular level than the trees that we know?
Yeah, maybe they're fine with salt water. Like maybe that's Or yeah,
but
you're right. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it's fresh.
See, looking in the back, I mean, it could be a huge lake. It very much could be. But looking in the background, I don't think you see very many other trees in the immediate background from those cluster of 4 or 5.
It's just a cluster at the beach. Yeah.
Yeah, and most of the ones that we see are in the background of all of these like really pointy hills. It's a really weird layout that you see all around there, and I realized that it actually looks exactly like all of the King Kong time. When you see Kong's like home turf, it's those same hills. Mm-hmm. It's really interesting. And I don't know if I think this came out after the Peter Jackson version. I don't know who made the first version of Kong that had those hills where they.
I want to say that's Peter Jackson. That was 2005.
But see, he may have been emulating the first version of Kong that came out in whatever the 70s or whatever. So this could have been an homage back to that, making the hills look like the Kong stuff from way back then. We'll have to do a comparison to see where those first came from.
I also wonder to what extent, because a big influence on Lucas's Imaginary is the kind of samurai fiction. Because to me, those trees in the first shot almost have like a bonsai vibe.
Yeah, definitely.
In a certain way, and so to my mind, it's like maybe a pastiche of all of that, where it's sort of him taking that vision of, what if bonsai but big, which I love George Lucas's brain. He's like, bonsais are cool, but what if very big? And then taking that and kind of blending it in with the King Kong thing and kind of making it feel like, because even the armor that they wear. Trying to find a frame. They've kind of got these cuirasses and these skirts. I'm gonna say all the armor words wrong, so don't at me. But they kind of have, the armor is very patchwork, and it's sort of like there is certainly a. And I mean, this is where it gets confusing though, because then the tribal aspect of these structures doesn't really mesh with, like, it's like you were saying before, the technology, the King Kong stuff, and the Japanese influence. They all seem at odds, but there's something about putting them all together that none of them sort of stand out as weird.
Something that really stood out as weird to me was looking at the battle setup itself, because, and I'm pretty sure this was just Lucas, like, very much trying to copy, like, Normandy and the images that we see from that, the fact that they're doing a beach invasion, which makes no sense when it is a world where you have flying craft. So why do you need to approach from the water?
Because Saving Private Ryan was really good, Darth.
Yeah.
We're gonna do that again.
And like the dialogue sets it up to make sense, but it sets it up in the wrong direction, because the very beginning they say something along the lines of the droids have deployed their shields or something like that, so we can't bombard them.
The droids have started up their main power generators. Then now the time is.
So that would have made sense if it was the opposite. It was like, we have deployed our shields, the droids can't attack us from space. Then they have to attack from the beach.
Oh, I see.
But they attack. Yeah, but they did it the other way around, which doesn't set up.
What are they? Where are the shields then?
Yeah, that's also a good point. Is like, what are the shields protecting from the droids? Unless it's just like the huge landing ships of the droids, but we never see the shields that they even mention, which is another kind of like film faux pas. Is like you say something and you don't show the thing, and now the audience is kind of left wondering, like, what were you even talking about?
Like, why even mention it? You could have just been like, the Wookiees need our help with that beach invasion that's happening. Like, it's extra qualification. And maybe it was a deleted scene, you know what I mean? Like, maybe they intended to shoot that or something, but don't leave that in your final edit. That's the... Yeah. There are so many little things like that where it seems really harmless, but it really just adds this layer of density that is unnecessary. One thing I will say, and just to the... Before we move on from the trees briefly, there is something interesting in the way that the structures are embedded into the trees, where It's not like what I would have imagined, which is sort of, you have really dense trees that have lots of branches and you're building into them. They're sort of like kind of driven into the side of these trunks. And it gives it a really weird look that is kind of interesting. Like, I don't know, when I think of like, you know, a kind of coded native race living in trees, you kind of imagine like tree houses that are like sort of among the branches and stuff. But these are like almost just like, it's like a spaceship has come down with a structure and they just gone dunk into the tree. Like that's kind of the look here.
Yeah.
And like, I think that's why it works for me in a certain sense, because when you go, well, how did they build these? It feels like they were prefabbed and just like attached to these. I don't know.
Yeah. And I'm trying to remember my my Aragon, and I think this is where I'm remembering it from. That when we see the trees that they're living in, that they have somehow like actually like maybe used magic to hollow out the tree, and so they're living like they were actually inside the huge trunk of the tree. I don't remember which fantasy story that's from.
It could be any number. It sounds like an Aragon thing.
Yeah. But regardless, that's kind of more what I would have pictured, rather than everything being like you said, kind of just slapped together. And the trees themselves are not at all what I would have pictured. I remember initially not liking the big bonsai idea, because it just doesn't seem to fit what I had always had in my head picturing, because you always read in several of the books about how tall these trees are, like literally going up into the clouds. They're so tall, and the curved bonsai trunk doesn't give that imagery, because it's a lot. You wouldn't expect something growing curved like that.
No.
To
but then
go
it's like
up.
is it just this one beach that's different and we don't see the rest of, maybe Kashyyyk is different biomes and like that's a different area? Because I mean, to my mind, when I think of Kashyyyk, I think of Kashyyyk as portrayed in the video game. What's the not The Last Jedi? That's the movie. Jedi Outcast. Fallen Order Jedi Outcast. Is that what it's called? In that game, that Kashyyyk is a lot more like what I imagine, where it's sort of like the nature and the Kashyyyk like constructs are very much blended together, and it's often hard to tell where one starts and where the rest of it ends. I mean, even the Force Unleashed, that opening sequence on Kashyyyk, still kind of rings a bit more true in the way that it feels more like a place where people like live, like it's a society, like there are, you know, bridges connecting different houses and things like that. I don't know, there's something about this that, like, it feels, and maybe it is, maybe it's just like an outpost for beach landings, but it doesn't, there's something about this that I'm just like, I don't get why you would live here. Like, I don't understand.
And actually, like, that's
know?
a really interesting idea, that why was that there in the first place if we assume that those 4 trees are abnormal to the rest of Kashyyyk? And it actually kind of makes sense that there might be this like water culture of people that are not Wookiees, that are the Wookiees' enemies, and so that, you know, that is actually a forward base for their army versus the water reptile army or something like that.
Well, just they got a whole mess of Jar Jars in that lake, you know what I mean? Just down there, ready to come out. And they gotta be hey, I'm gonna go on Jar Jar watch now and keep an eye out for them, you know what I mean? It's
now,
look, but on that note though, like, it just, yeah, the location is, I agree, very. It's strange to say the least that these exist. Yeah, I'm with you on that, I guess, is the first thought here. Very odd.
And talking about, because we're kind of talking about the battle itself, something that I just found absolutely hilarious is, like kind of rewinding the footage to where the droids are starting to come towards them, and you come into like a high crane shot of all of the Wookiees hiding down behind this like steel embankment. Mm-hmm. They're all crouched down, right? The one walks forward, roars, all of them stand up, come out of cover, and start running down the beach so they could just be mowed down by the incoming troops.
Which is like, what happens.
Like,
why did you
totally
were in cover? You were in cover. You waited till they were close enough for you to be in target range, then you jumped out.
Yeah, and it's like they were all crouching down, hoping to hide their numbers or something, so that the droids who probably could see heat signatures wouldn't know they were there. I mean,
also, they have spaceships. They could have just looked from space and been like, seal them Wookiees.
Yeah.
Man, I gotta say though, how do you feel about some of the technology here? So like, a big thing that Lucas is doing is preceding the the designs that we'll see later, right? So like a lot of the stuff here is like, oh, this is like a pre Walker type. What's the four-legged ATST called?
The AT-AT?
Yeah, but
AT-AT?
Is that not? I thought that the AT is the AT-AT not the two-legged one? What's the four-legged one called?
I don't know. I'm just gonna fake that we knew this, and I'll put a big graphic up.
Yeah, you should just overdub it with the correct name later. But like, there's something interesting to me of this kind of like imagination of, well, in a few years' time, all of this technology will be co-opted and, you know, be kind of twisted by the Emperor. But for now, it's still it's the good guys' version of these war machines.
Yeah.
And that kind of works for me in the weird way. I think I really disliked it at the time because I was like, man, this is just really like unnecessary and kind of cheesy in some sense. But I mean, also, I think they've realized the technology in the first film is so sleek and shiny. Like the Republic's tech is so futuristic in comparison to what we see in the later Star Wars films, that it's interesting to me seeing them slowly bridging that gap where the Republic Star Cruisers and that fully chromed out ship that Padme rides around in, that stuff is so like sci-fi, and then you're slowly seeing the shift toward this more utilitarian kind of war design that the Empire is going to start to wield, and then you can sort of start to see like, okay, they had this fantastic technology, and over time it's becoming less and less fantastic and more utilitarian, and then by the time you get to the later the actual Star Wars stories, it kind of makes sense that it's like all the technology is like really old and broken down and shitty looking, and none of it is like impressive and shiny like we see in the first one. I feel like it's, maybe they could have planned it a bit better to an extent, but it does work for me, I think. Yeah.
And since you mentioned the word cheesy, I wanted to go on and bring up the Tarzan yell. So one of the Wookiees is, I could never figure out where the vine was that he was swinging on, but I went back and slowly watched, and there's like a ship that the vine is attached to, and he swings down, does the Tarzan yell,
yep,
lands on the enemy ship, slaps a bomb on it, and then jumps off into the water when the bomb goes off.
Yep.
Number one, just the yell itself, well, part of me is like, yeah, I love Tarzan, but on the other hand, it's like, that's super
I could just
cheesy.
watch the. Oh, he's on like they're jumping down from like a little ship, like a little glider or something.
Yeah.
That's what the vine's attached to. Right.
Yeah. But the other thing that I found so interesting about that was I started thinking about the realism of their species being able to swim, because I went with my brother to a zoo recently, and they were talking about the big gorilla when we went past it, and one of the things they said was that they cannot swim because their like bone structure, their muscle density does not allow them to float whatsoever. Wookiees are exactly the same way. Like, they are so freaking strong. They have no fat on them. They would not be able to swim, like, biologically. So the fact that they jumped into the water there after they chunked that bomb at the thing is
You're
just
saying
interesting.
2 dead Wookiees, maybe.
Yeah. I mean,
Suicide
maybe
Wookiee run.
Maybe that was their kamikaze run, but at the same time, like, this just fully feels like something we've talked about, with the sequel trilogy, where this was just a level of detail that, Lucas did not think about when he was setting up this scene. If you're going to have like, same thing with Rey, if you're going to have a character swim, can they swim? No, desert planet dwelling girl cannot swim, and ape-like Wookiee probably cannot swim.
This is something that I think about very often, and for some reason the touch point that I always go back to is the Assassin's Creed games, where in the first one, Altair cannot swim. He drowns like a muppet, because he lives in the Middle East, there isn't a lot of water. If you dive into a body of water in that game, you just drown. Then you get to like something like Black Flag, where it's like, well, he's a pirate. Man, now I just want to replay Black Flag. That game's so good. But he's a pirate, and so you can just like jump off the boat and start diving and like collect treasures and stuff, right? Because he's a pirate, he swims all the time. And there's a level of like, yes, they just obviously hadn't designed a swimming mechanic in the first one. but it also works narratively and feels correct. This guy wouldn't be able to do that. I think in this context, what's interesting is we don't know the Wookiee anatomy to an extent. It's a sentence I never thought I'd say, but it's very odd. But there is a level of like it to me when I'm watching this, that doesn't click as weird because I'm like, well, if they're swinging down and dropping this bomb and hopping in the water, they must have an exit strategy here. They must be able to swim or there's some way out. What's weirder is this is two Wookiees dropping in, destroying a single droid ship and then booking it. But they need to then reset and get back on that glider in order to be effective again. And this is a big problem that you have with the clone and the droid conflict writ large. It's a big thing that Clone Wars explores to a greater extent is in what capacity are these fights even important at all, given the scale of this conflict? Like, yes, you're fighting for the soul of Kashyyyk or whatever, but like, on a very utilitarian basis, that one individual action of those two Wookiees destroying that little wheelie tank thing does not matter at all. Like, it's a moment we don't need to care about because it doesn't affect anything. Whereas, like, Yoda's involvement is the reason this has stakes. That's what makes this scene important, is that Yoda is there, and I guess that Chewbacca is there for some reason.
Yeah.
But I mean, I suppose from a narrative perspective, it's really hard to make these encounters feel meaningful in this film because they are literally devices in order to let characters do certain things and be involved in certain moments and grow. But it is crucially like our core kind of 5 to 10 characters that matter. The conflict is literally a set dressing for them to do stuff, right?
But the interesting
I mean?
thing is, though, that is the problem with war itself. That is why so many people, so many soldiers get so disillusioned with what they're fighting for, because they can see firsthand what they're doing doesn't matter in the grand scope. It doesn't matter if they take this one fortress, if they capture that one hill, if the two Wookiees destroy this one thing, because it doesn't matter. You know? So it's like weirdly realistic, actually.
Well, it's funny you say that because, I mean, a lot of the... I mean, this is not a surprise to anybody, but a lot of the first 3 films are deeply interested, and probably the Clone Wars, I would say to a greater extent, because of Filoni and his interest, but there's a deep interest in the Bush era political instruments that exist in the US and that are being wielded globally, where you have this conservative group of ideologues, right, the Jedi, who are imposing their version of order to an extent with the written approval of the Galactic Senate, right? The Senate's like, hey, we need the Jedi's help. And they are being met by a resistance who don't necessarily have an ideology themselves, but are a group of ideologies together. And I think in Lucas's imaginary, that is sort of what's happening in that early Bush era, where you do have Iraq and Afghanistan beginning to become challenging to justify and explain why why there are troops still on the ground there. It becomes increasingly challenging to explain because there isn't a single bad guy anymore, right? And particularly, as Obama takes over and they start to assassinate some of these leaders, it becomes really hard to be like, here's the big villain whose ideas we are trying to defeat, in real life, there are no Emperor Palpatines, right? It's just a bunch of people wielding political instruments and this machine of war where people are trying to either save, where they live, defend themselves, or try and achieve something else. There is no clear delineation of like, these are the individual actors on one side and these are the individual actors on the other. And so there's a tendency to want to reduce this stuff to that. And what's curious to me about this exact problem where it's like, how do you make these conflicts feel meaningful in a narrative setting? Because this is a story, while also conveying, hey, this is like a really grand scale conflict, becomes increasingly challenging. And one of the ways that you can do that in a war story is you either end up following like an individual group of people. There's that Brad Pitt movie about the tanks in World War II. I can't remember what it's called. Really, really good. Really, really solid. But that focuses on a single unit that operate a tank. And it follows their individual story, similar to like Saving Private Ryan, where you scope right in. The alternative is you scope right out, and you tell a war story, as it were. And Tom Clancy does a lot of these where it's like, okay, here's the story about this submarine and the ecology of the people that live there, and how that extrapolates to the wider framework of the war and the conflict that's happening, you know, during the Cold War, for example. One of the challenges Star Wars has in this particular moment on this particular planet is in coding the Wookiees as this native type of people, right? They are deliberately coded natively. They have there's a stick there, which in one of the first shots on the beach that is like clearly like, you know, an indigenous weapon. They have these battle cries. They have these long beards and they braid everything. You know, they are deliberately coded in almost the way that Tolkien described it. You know, is there is an extent to which the Mongolian coding has a tendency toward brutality and villainy in a way that, like, the second that you start to code this thing and like the helmets with the spikes on them and stuff, it, you know, that was the image of the bad guy for so long in Western society. You know, that's why orcs look the way they do, and in the books they're explicitly like the Mongols, and goblins then later become, I say goblins, not like the proper noun, but rather the group of like the faceless bad guys have a tendency toward that, right? This animalistic kind of tribalistic tendency. They're always yelling and they don't really talk, and they're like running through the forest and stuff. And so to me, it's a real challenge here where the Wookiees are the good guys, and so they're coded with all of the iconography that goes with that native race, right? And this native coding. And then you go, but you're adding this layer of, well, we want to explain that this is not a necessarily meaningful conflict in the larger scale of the theater of war. The thing that makes it, or I think the thing that film thinks makes it matter, is that these are a native, less developed people, potentially, is some of the coding here, right? They're doing these battle cries, they use sticks to fight. It's important that they be protected because they are unable to protect themselves in this moment. And as you step through the procedural logic of like how this scene gets put together, it's not by itself a problem, but in total, there is something about it which is the Jedi group of ideologues must come in and provide additional military support to these native people to repel these invaders. But they're the good guys, kinda, but they're also not the good guys, kinda. So it's unclear what the film's opinion is on this, because it never really decides, like, is this a good thing to do or not, coming in and saving them. And so in its commentary on this kind of Bush era politics, you don't land anywhere. You just the text renders the politics of the era without really commenting on it. And that's the real challenging thing, I think, with this film in particular, and this moment in particular, is this says nothing about the Wookiees and their the value of their society to the Republic. It doesn't say anything about the value of the clones necessarily in the war. It doesn't say much about the droid army. It fails to say much about Yoda. It really is just a prop in order for Yoda to behead these dudes and for us to see Chewbacca again. And there's something really almost cynical about its inclusion, given it's only a 4-minute clip. It seems unnecessary to me to spend so many resources and man-hour and people who like the costume design and the CG and the model design, and they had to think about these trees and where would all of this work and logic just in service of like it's just a background, I guess. And that's probably where I struggle the most with this scene, is like it I'm not sure why it exists at all, is I guess what I'm getting at.
I mean, the interesting thing that you kind of brought up there was the fact that we see our heroes, we see Yoda and the clones as the good guys, where in fact this whole thing is just basically like a civil war of the Confederates who want to get out of the Galactic Republic, who are invading the planet. Not necessarily, why are they the bad guys? You know, like they are saying we are being controlled by an evil bureaucracy. We do not want to be part of that evil bureaucracy. Kashyyyk, we are coming here to liberate you from this evil bureaucracy. And then Yoda is saying, no, we're not going to let you leave, so we're going to protect you?
That's what I mean. It's real yikes, isn't it? It's just but then I don't know if it sticks to landing, though, because I mean, if you then were to like continue the procedural analog, you would have, I guess the Republic would never leave? I don't know.
So much of this is also in the subtext of us caring because it's Chewbacca and it's because it's his home world.
Yes.
If that were not the case, like you said, I don't know that there would necessarily be a point to this scene. Actually, the entire point of the scene was to get Yoda away from everyone so that he was by himself when Order 66 happened. I think that's the entire... Yeah.
That's upsetting. It never occurred to me that's the only...
Yeah. It never occurred to me either until just now, but that might be the only reason he was sent to Kashyyyk, aside from them wanting to bring in the Wookiees to show Kashyyyk and to show Chewbacca and Chewbacca's father and see a little bit about that world. And maybe this was them saying, okay, this is a way that we could do that because we've always wanted to do it. And it'll also get the main point done, get Yoda away from everyone.
I mean, we also know how Lucas writes, which is he just goes, that'd be cool, let's do that. He's really, and like this, that's not a diss, to be clear. That's just like how we know that's his mode of operation is, man, I've always wanted to do that, let's just do it. You hear about, so I've been watching the Clone Wars recently, and one of the things that is amazing is the DVD box sets. Each episode has, there's like a 2 or 3 minute, kind of clip of Dave Filoni explaining that episode or like an idea from that episode. And so much of how the episode ideas start is he'll be like, Lucas came to me and he said, hey, we should do an episode about this thing. And then we just did it. And it's like, and Filoni would go, oh, but I'm not sure that would work given, in the previous film, we said that, it implied this about that. Lucas is like, I don't care, just find a way to make it work. Because he's not really interested in the continuity or the lore. He's just like, he's just real loosey-goosey with it. Contrary to every YouTube commentator ever who's like, George Lucas is a purist and the sequel trilogy doesn't care about what he put together. Lucas doesn't give a fuck. He doesn't care. He's like, listen, it'd be cool if we went to a Wookiee planet. Wouldn't that be cool? Put that in the film.
Yeah.
And there's an aspect to me that's like, that lack of restraint, kind of cool. Because then people are like, here's all of our millions of dollars, go and do it.
It's really interesting that you said that because I actually have that in my notes. I have that'd look cool, quote unquote, because that was something like someone was talking in the comments of another video about how it was the talking about the lightsaber when Rey threw it and Kylo caught it, and that whole thing, and just how much stuff was introduced in the sequel trilogy specifically for like how the Force works, that seems to only have been there because it'll look cool. And they didn't really think about, the long-term implications of how they're redefining the Force or redefining the Jedi just because they wanted to have a scene that would look cool. And there was just a lot of that to me in this entire scene that this entire Kashyyyk thing. There was a lot of stuff that was just, it'll look cool to have the Wookiees stand up and charge the beach, and it'll look cool to have them swing out on a vine, and
yeah, to be fair, that in that the first sequel film where it's like one of the opening shots where Kylo Ren freezes a blaster bolt. I think it's Poe Dameron tries to shoot him and he freezes it. Yeah. I fell out of my fucking chair in the set. I was like, what? Like, it's so cool. And then Kylo Ren comes out, you're like, holy shit, this guy's scary. Like, there is an element to which like that does work. But I mean, that's in service of something, right? That's showing you how strong
that's the problem, that
he
just
is.
Because you may introduce an idea just saying that'll be cool, but if you do it the right way, you could build upon that. You could build it into the story or into the character development or something. So you may have had an idea that someone should freeze a blaster bolt because we've never seen it, and theoretically with the Force it could be done because it's just a physical object, although it's just plasma or whatever you want to call it. It's still a physical object. Force can stop physical objects. It makes sense to the lore. So just having an idea and saying it looks cool, it's not a negative thing, but if you don't stop and think, okay, as a writer, just because I think something is neat, that doesn't mean something has to be included or should be included. We got to stop, take a step back, think about what is it actually adding and is it detracting anything just to have something cool in here.
I mean, that's Stephen King always talks about killing your darlings, right? Like, you have to be ruthless with yourself and you have to go, this is rad, but I had an exact moment like this last week where I'm in the middle of editing my third novel, and there's a character that I brought back from the first book, and it was one of my favorite scenes I've ever written, and it was so cool where like he confronts the main character and you're like, oh my god, he's back, and he's like it's just like, it was such a cool scene to write. And they had this kind of scrap where, you know, they're both, you know, it's pouring with rain and the main character's trying to get away, and it's like it's the sloppiest like fight ever. It's not really a fight, they're just like falling over and trying to hit each other, and he's trying to escape, and it's just like such a cool moment. And this guy is so sinister, but in this like gross kind of it's so fun to write and really, really cool on paper. And when I was going back through the structural edit this week, I went, this doesn't serve the story. This is just something I thought was cool. And it was so hard, but I had to like discipline myself and be like, the amount of work I would need to do in order to justify including this would disrupt so much of the other work that I've done so far. And there's another thing that needs to happen here that it would much better serve the story. And it took like all of my self-restraint to be like, I obviously saved the scene, Darth. Okay, I still have the words, but I had to cut it from the book and replace it with something else. And it was like heartbreaking. I was like, oh, this was so cool. But you have to do that sometimes. You have to be disciplined in that way if you want to commit to doing, you know, the kind of story you want. And the other thing that you touched on there, which is interesting, is there's a concept in structural editing where if you change, remove, or add something, the way you have to think about it, I think a lot of people think about storytelling like dominoes, where it's like, oh, well, if you do this, it's going to cascade, right? The way that I always try and describe it is it's more like writing a novel is more like you have a puzzle that you're putting together, and every piece that you add or remove is going to change the total outcome of that puzzle and the total shape of that final puzzle. And so adding one piece sounds like it's not going to do much, but it could completely radically alter the placement of 5 or 6 other pieces. And you don't necessarily know that those pieces are next to each other, right? They could be, you know, if you change something in the first scene of your film, that could actually alter the scene right before the credits in ways that you haven't sort of envisioned yet. And so it becomes really challenging when you want to, for a scene like this, drop it in because it's cool, without going, okay, but what are the implications here for later on? What does this mean for Yoda and his relationship to Chewbacca? What does this mean for the way that the world thinks of Kashyyyk? What does this mean for the sequel, for the original trilogy, where nobody talks about Kashyyyk ever, where nobody talks Wookiee anymore? And there are sort of a number of challenging things that happen with an apparatus as large as Star Wars. And the funny thing is, the Clone Wars spend so much time fixing so many of these problems. They have, 6 solid seasons. I haven't seen the most recent season. I don't even know what that yet. But 6 solid seasons of doing so much legwork to correct to course correct a lot of these decisions. And then Lucas still, during the Clone Wars, is getting in and being like, well, this would be cool. And then you have to watch these writers try and make it work. And it's like it's so fascinating to me that people defend Lucas's imaginary so vehemently when he's the one guy that doesn't care about the continuity. He couldn't give a shit.
And it's funny because the biggest thing that supports like what you're talking about is Ahsoka. Like one of my best friends, who's also a huge Star Wars fan, cannot stand the idea of her because she's never mentioned in the films. Thus, she is a continuity break. And she was only added in his mind because Lucas was like, I want to tell this other little side story. It doesn't actually fit with the main story because it's not in there at all. There's no hint of it at all. But we're going to do it anyway. And it's exactly like what you talked about. It's like, it would be cool to have Anakin have a Padawan, and then they separate, and it's draws him more towards the dark side and all this stuff. And yeah, she ended up being a great character. Fans love her, but so all of that aside, I mean, she was not part of the canon, and she was thrust in there, and they tried to make it make sense.
Some of the worst parts of that show as well are things where they bring in canon stuff. Like they bring a Moff Tarkin for an episode, and it's terrible. Like, there's a lot of that where it works better as its own, I guess, universe, like sub-universe between these films. But so I guess I'm interested then, from a Star Wars fan / expert perspective, Kashyyyk does not get doted on heavily in the main continuity, like we're saying, right? Like, nobody really talks about Kashyyyk ever. Is in your mind, is there value in, let's imagine this was within the context of like a more meaningful scene. Is there value in including this aside from the two motivators here, which is like Lucas saying that'd be cool and selling toys? Those are like the two motivations for including this. Because you can have like a cool new camo clone trooper armor. You can sell a Chewbacca Star Wars toy, which is a huge part of those original films. What's the value here from a world like what is this doing for Star Wars that isn't done previously?
Well, I mean, one thing, like we had said, like just having it and acknowledging something that's been a fan favorite, because like in the films, Kashyyyk was not made canon until this moment. As far as I remember, it was not in any of the rest of the scenes from episode 3. It wasn't in episode 2 or episode 1. So it also, you could say, is just a nice way of them making something canon and giving us a visual glimpse of something that we had not seen before. It also could be kind of building on that from the fact that, looking back to, I don't remember which book it was, but the Wookiees were actually a huge part of the slave labor that helped build the first Death Star, if you're looking at the first Legends thing. So that was another reason that the Emperor wanted to take over Kashyyyk, was because that labor force represented a very good way to build what he wanted to build. But to answer your question, the main reason that this scene is in there is the same reason that Obi-Wan went to the planet that he went to. Yoda went to this planet, and it didn't matter what the planet was. Obi-Wan went to the planet to get Grievous. It didn't matter what that planet was. The entire point of both of them leaving was for Anakin to be alone. So, no, there was no point in Kashyyyk to the story. They just needed Yoda gone so Anakin didn't have a mentor. They needed Obi gone so that Anakin didn't have his father-brother figure. So that the only one he had there was Mace, who he never had a good relationship with.
Huh.
Any other planet, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
plop Yoda on any other planet, the indigenous species, doesn't matter. It could have been a high-tech species there, and it would have been the same consequence. Yoda is just there to get him out of the way. Same as Obi-Wan.
Now I'm like, why didn't they? Because they could put Yoda anyway. I don't really care. But they could have put Obi-Wan on Tatooine, and then they could have had the final confrontation on Tatooine, and that could be the reason Anakin never goes back. Like, there's an element of a need for cool new planets and locations because it's Star Wars, and like I get that. But just suddenly seeing a version of this that is like way more in touch with the Seven Samurai style influence that started the kind of franchise, and using that to bridge the gap to the original trilogy. And you could include stuff like maybe Wookiees live on like, sure, they could be on a temperate planet like this. You could still have a similar scene. But there's an extent to which it's almost so fantastic that when you go to the Obi-Wan thing, and don't get me wrong, the Obi-Wan Grievous chase scene is cool, and we'll talk about that eventually, but that planet's also kind of nothing. And it's just a shame that they didn't use this as an opportunity to explore or redefine the emotional space of locations we already, will be important to our characters later. Like, we know that Anakin has a lot of trauma attached to Tatooine already because of all that happened with his mom and the Sand People and that kind of thing. And so, like, there's an opportunity for us to understand, like, well, what is that space that has so much emotional weight to the franchise already? What does that mean to Obi-Wan before Anakin turns? What do these spaces mean? What does that mean for him after Qui-Gon's death? There's just such resonance in re-exploring that and having it be the site of a conflict that, to my mind, the ease with which Kashyyyk is included, the ease with which they go to the big volcano planet, man, it's just like it lets, and I get it, it makes the world bigger, it makes it feel less small, but there's a part of me that wishes these were places that we knew already, and it was kind of like, okay, let's explore what the outcome of this whole trilogy has been, and let's see Order 66 happen somewhere that's meaningful to us as a viewer and to these guys as characters. It just seems like a real missed opportunity.
Like, a really interesting thought based off what you were just saying was that, like, the physical structure of the planet where Obi and Grievous had their thing, it physically is the same thing as the underworld of Coruscant. You have the top layer, which nothing is on, and then they go down into these big sinkholes, and built into the sides of all of these sinkholes, like there's a scene from the Clone Wars where they're literally going down into a huge sinkhole, which takes them down into the underworld. Like, structurally, it looks like the exact same thing. They could have had that whole thing where Grievous was hiding in the underworld under Coruscant, which has been something that so many people have always wanted to see in the films.
That'd be so cool.
Because there's so much under there, and it's just a different world. It's grimy and crime ridden, and there's all this really cool stuff. So you're right, they could have melded the things together and had Anakin and his stuff happening on the upper level, and then Obi-Wan and his stuff happening on the lower level, which I guess thematically could have been a really interesting thing to have. That'd
be kind of cool. Some mimetic resonance. Look it up in your thesaurus, you nerds. Hang on, I'm gonna grab a glass of water really quick because I gotta show you something. Hang on. Darth, do you see anything different about my glass this week? This is my new Star Wars podcasting glass.
So is that a classic 1999?
It is. It was a classic. I've had it since. It was from a, I don't know why, but in Australia, a lot of the promotional material is you would buy like a this was a what do you call it? A jar of jam. And you would eat the jam, and you would be left over with a novelty Star Wars glass. And I, for some reason, have retained these the whole time. I have 2 of them. They're both in perfect condition somehow. It's got the little the Starfighter.
Yeah.
This thing which I don't recognize. I don't know what the fuck that is.
Darth Maul's.
Okay.
It's the Interceptor, I believe he called it.
Space Station. Oh, hang on, wrong way. Space Station. No. And then the little droid fighter up there, little guy. This is a cool little. There you go. So that's a little treat for all of you watching the video.
Yeah, we I think we get most of our stuff like that from like McDonald's, which just makes me feel sad now to think about that.
That's upsetting. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's tough. Damn, McDonald's, why you gotta do me like that? Do you think...
Can we please have Subway start sponsoring some stuff? Let's have some healthy companies.
Yeah, can we just get Star Wars like on a granola bar or something? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I would do a because they drink all kinds of crazy alcohol and shit in Star Wars. I would drink like a Star Wars whiskey or something. You know what I mean? Styled, because they have some cool drinking glasses and mugs in those films too.
Yeah.
Like some.
And I think I think at Galaxy's Edge they tried to bring in a lot of the Star Wars drinks so that you could like order them yourself.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that you get like blue milk and of course I'm sure that it's just milk with the food coloring, but still.
Just a blue pina colada.
Yeah.
Actually sounds pretty good. I'm like, I'm good for pina colada.
I don't know why I'm just talking about random drinks from shows, but I'm still really sad at the idea that apparently butterbeer just tastes awful in real life.
It's bad. I've had it. It's not good.
Yeah, that saddens me. It's just, I've always pictured it as just this magical thing that,
I mean, it makes sense when you say it out loud and think about it enough, like...
Yeah, butter and beer, I mean...
Not good. Bad. The dairy and beer, what are you talking about? No.
Yeah.
Awful.
Although, I did go through a phase where instead of cream and coffee, I was using butter. Because it's a thing. I didn't make it up out of nowhere. It's a thing. It tasted like buttered toast.
Butter
like you were drinking
coffee.
liquid buttered toast. It was
my
like
God.
weirdly fantastic.
Butter coffee recipe benefits and risks. Butter coffee is a drink consisting of brewed coffee, unsalted butter, and medium chain triglycerides, an easily digested type of fat. Oh my God. Butter coffee. Do you want to know how to make it? Step 1: brew about 1 cup, 8 to 12 ounces of coffee. Add 1 to 2 tablespoons of coconut oil. Were you doing coconut oil, Darth?
I was not that advanced, no. I just took a chunk of butter and whipped it in there.
That's, you absolute madman. What are you talking about? Oh, it's really bad for you. Jesus Christ. Nearly 85% of the fat in buttered coffee is saturated fat. Cool.
Yeah, but I mean, we're Americans. Like, everything we do is bad for us.
Like, if you could have found a way to put sugar in it, you would have. You know what I mean? That's the American way. They're like, McDonald's isn't unhealthy enough. Add sugar to the bread. Like, that's what y'all are doing. It is really hard like getting unhealthy food here is easy now. But before we had Uber Eats, you had to really go out of your way. It was either McDonald's was like the unhealthiest thing around, or you'd have to like go in search of a KFC, like on a treasure hunt. Just so few and far between.
Which is a really interesting like side note that I've had written down for a long time, that I want to explore the lack of obesity in Star Wars, because you see it in a few things, but it's mainly aliens that you see it in. You don't frequently see it in humans, and like the implications there are really interesting. Like either they have just figured out a way to either genetically or through drugs just turn off the fat accumulation, whatever, or they have gotten to a point where they're like, the food that they are eating is like so pure and good for you that it tastes fantastic and it's healthy.
Well, my speculation has always been that it's not that it tastes fantastic, but it's like you just get only the essential nutrients that you need. Like it's very utilitarian based has always been my like, I don't know where I've got that from. That's just in my brain as like the way that Star Wars works. I'm thinking of the Matrix, but whatever. But like the slot that where it's just like all of your, all of your vegetables, like, but there's no like.
We have some Limbus bread in there too. Like the sweetest
exactly.
taste ever, and it keeps you full for 3 full days.
You get sick of it eventually. Remember in the film when they added that weird like subplot of Gollum trying to trick Frodo into thinking Sam ate it all? Such a weird addition. I remember like the first time I saw that I was like, why did they add this? It's so weird. Like, it's in the books. It's just like this suspicion grows over time, and they don't really have a falling out, but they get to the very end, and it makes Frodo's turn even more tragic, where it's like Sam was on his side the whole time, and he still turned regardless. But in the film, it's just a weird like. I don't know, man. It's very strange.
And the funny thing is, like if you'll think back to the film, that was like the primary motivator that broke the friendship, because when Sam is climbing down the mountain all by himself, he gets to the bottom, or he falls down, and then he finds down there the leaves with the limbus bread wrapped up in it, and that's when he realized, oh wait, Gollum threw it down here and he tricked me.
Oh yeah.
So like that was the prime thing. It was the stupid bread that finally broke them and made them. But it also doesn't make sense that Sam knew he didn't eat it, so why did him finding it prove to him that Gollum threw it down?
There's it's not like he went, maybe I did eat it in my sleep. Like what?
Yeah, that's what it kind of felt like.
He should have kept following them.
I did.
I mean, I guess it was to separate them so that Gollum could lure him to Shelob, but that still works anyway. It's a giant dark cave. They could get separated.
Which, I mean, I've said that same sentence so many times in my life. I was like, I can't find that food. Did I eat it? Maybe I just ate it. I don't remember eating it.
That does happen to me constantly, to be fair, yes. I'm like, was that me? It's gone. It must have been. The other thing with that scene is like, Shelob is scary, okay, because in the books, you know that Shelob used to be this crazy hot elf lady who was like all up in Sauron's business. You know, they had like a romance or whatever. It was based on like jealousy and spite and stuff like that. And the real tragedy of Shelob is that over time she has lost her sentience to become this giant spider. And there's an aspect to which that makes her scarier, because you know there's an implication you've heard tell of like where this person comes from. I like that in the film, and maybe it's a change that I do enjoy, is that it is just big scary spider. Nobody is talking about the fact that like used to be a hot elf chick. It's just like, nah, big scary spider. Because you know what? Spiders are scary. Real big spiders, real scary. So it works for me. I'm terrified of spiders. So like this, you know, anytime there's a spider level in a video game, I don't want to do it. No, thank you.
Yeah.
In that Star Wars game, when the big spiders will jump out at you from the corners and shit, nah, bad. No, can't do it.
And they did it so well. Like the when Sam comes up on them, and Shelob is like holding Frodo up in the air and wrapping him up in her silk, like.
So good.
That got me. Like that really got me. And I mean, I was a mid-teenager when I saw that for the first time, but like that image stuck with me.
So it's the animation's so smooth. It wrapping, like it's just so well done.
Yeah.
Should we start a Lord of the Rings podcast?
That I have that written down. Yes, I must.
Because we can talk about this for ages.
Yes. I was
Man.
so big into those films. Like one summer, I watched literally. I had the huge expanded, DVD set that had like 5 different discs of all the bonus footage and stuff. So like I watched the entire trilogy with the producers' commentary
hell
on. Then
yeah.
I watched it again with the art director's commentary on. Then I watched it again with the sound effects commentary on. Then like every single one, to the point
So
where I
good.
was just like, this is getting old. But I gotta hear them all.
But I gotta know what happens. Do they have director's commentary for Star Wars? They must. They must, right?
I have never seen any movie that has the extent of what Lord of the Rings had.
No.
That doesn't mean they don't exist, but I've never seen anything that had that much.
Director's comment.
And there's a lot for Star Wars, and I've seen a lot for Star Wars, but most of what I've seen for them has been featurettes. I don't know that I've ever watched one that was like literally the movie, but with commentary all the way through.
I think what the Star Wars ones looking at this, they're more like, they don't really do commentaries. They do like documentaries almost. I'm looking at a making of Star Wars Revenge of the Sith documentary, an hour and 18 minutes, that someone's just stolen and put on YouTube.
Yes, I seem to recall
they
they called them featurettes, and it was like the episode 1 making of featurette, and then the episode 1 practical effects featurette, and stuff like that. And they might be 10 minutes, they might be 30 minutes, whatever.
Interesting. It is curious to me that like, because I wonder to what extent part of what makes Star Wars fans so ardent about the Lucas imaginary and the things that they've decided about the apparatus around Star Wars, part of what makes that so challenging to overcome, and why they get so passionate about this stuff and abandon all logic, is like there is an extent to which the lack of information leads them to kind of put things together and create narratives, and then it's like a narrative driven by emotion, where they're like, I believe this for this reason because there's not enough information. And so I think that's where you get into like kind of the really, no, I want to say toxic, but like the really like, this is, Lucas meant this and this thing, and if you don't understand that, you're a fucking idiot. You're not a real Star Wars fan. And I think it's just like a lack of information that gives rise to fans like that, or kind of subgroups of fan communities like that.
Well, not even a lack of information, but just the ways that all of us interpret information differently. Like the number of times on my videos where someone will comment and it'll be the most brilliant, insightful comment, and then they'll end it with, I can't believe you noticed all that. This was so brilliant. And I'm like, of course I saw that. That's definitely what I meant when I did this video. I was not literally just talking about a helmet and that's it.
Sometimes people do that, where they'll add a bunch of context to what you said, and you're like, yeah, totally, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, big time. But yeah, me as well.
Yeah. So I definitely think Lucas was much more in the that'll look cool range of filmmaking. Granted, he goes way more in depth than anyone realizes, and unless you've watched any of the video essays that cover like his cycle theory and all of this stuff, because like I did not see any of it until they went back and look at the baton passing of how you when he introduces characters. It's one of the most fascinating things I've seen. Like they introduce C-3PO, and then 3PO introduces you to R2, and then he introduces you to the next character, and it just keeps going like that. Whereas the new films, they don't have that same insight to how they craft everything together. So yeah, he may have been that little look cool guy. He may have been I don't care about dialogue guy, but at the same time, it was really fascinating what he did craft together. And I could see why people want to give him so much credit, because they'll see the things that he did and they'll think, oh, everything must have been this masterful, grand plan. Although so few of us are like that in real life.
Yeah, look, it's tough. I mean, yeah, little writing techniques like that are really clever. Like, it's a really clever little bit of filmmaking that he's picked up from like the legacy of cinema. I mean, the other one that he does really well is anchor characters, where you will be, so like a really good example is like the Force is introduced to you through Obi-Wan in those original films, and so the voice of the Force becomes Obi-Wan, right? That is your anchor character for that idea. In the prequel trilogies, Qui-Gon Jinn is the voice of the mentor, right, who is outside the Jedi Council. So he is like a representative of the Force that is outside the parameters of the world we're going to be operating in moving forward. And so his voice actually leaves the story after that first one, because then we get fully invested in the Jedi Council. Like, you have an anchor character leave. And there is a lot of that going on where it's clear that Lucas understands a lot of the instruments of storytelling. I think that you just hit on the exact issue, which is like, but like all writers, he has stuff he cares about and stuff he doesn't. One of the biggest challenges with like Star Wars as a vehicle is that Lucas really doesn't care about stuff that a lot of the fans deeply care. He's interested in the things he's interested in, and part of the thing that's really cool about when Lucas isn't working on something directly, like the Clone Wars, for example, is that when you have people in charge like Filoni who are giant nerds for this stuff, like Filoni is like the biggest Star Wars geek. Like, you listen to those commentaries and he's just like geeking out, man. Like, he's just a nerd out here doing his thing, you know, consulting with Lucas, and Lucas is throwing ideas at him and he's making it work within the canon. And I think that is the blend that you want. I think the sequel trilogy suffers from J.J. Abrams to an extent, doesn't follow through with Rian Johnson's vision. I know we said this before, but I think, yeah, the biggest problem with Lucas is like, the types of films he's making are not the types of films that Star Wars nerds really care about. And that's just challenging to, I think, the concept of what pure Star Wars is, the way that a lot of people want to imagine it as. Because I think for Lucas, pure Star Wars has nothing to do with continuity and canon. It's these individual stories kind of all thread together into this big ballad, but really they are individual moments with cool stuff in them that pay homage to cinema and pay homage to the legacy of the work that he's cribbing off of and that he's learned from. And he's less interested in Star Wars as a proper noun, and he's more interested as Star Wars as a regular noun, like as a description for a series of events, and exploring ideas and visions and planets and tools and technology through the vehicle of this normal, you know, regular noun of Star Wars. And I think that you get stuck when you become really passionate about the proper noun of Star Wars, because the guy who started it could kind of take it or leave it, and ultimately did leave it. And that's going to be the legacy of this franchise probably forever, is him walking away from that proper noun, and that becoming really challenging for people that are super invested in it. Mm-hmm. And also I have this neat glass now, so that's good too. We all, in a way, Darth, we're all Star Wars.
I wish I had it set up so I could show, because this would have been the perfect time, but I got a new desk lamp, and it's the Millennium Falcon, and the light is the engine coming off of the back of it.
You have to put a picture on the edit, because that's incredible.
Yep.
That's so good. I want to get a they must do like they must do lightsaber lamps, surely. Lightsaber.
There's gotta be, but I don't know if I've seen one. I don't know if they're fan made or something. I know I've seen pictures of them.
Oh, they just kind of they don't look good. They don't look good. They're just like, it's just like a big stick on the floor. I don't know what I was expecting. Oh no. Oh, it looks like something else. Okay. All right, wall mounted, it's pretty cool. There's a wall mounted one that's cool. This one, yeah, these aren't good. These are bad. I'd still buy one though.
I've seen a couple of those like in babies' rooms and stuff, and it was just literally the thing on the wall and you just turn it on, but it's still a cool little light and /wall art.